The small town of Lafayette Parish in Louisiana had always been the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Neighbors looked out for each other, children played freely in the streets until sunset, and doors were rarely locked. It was a community built on trust and familiarity, where generations of families had grown up together and shared their lives through decades of memories. But in the autumn of 1995, that sense of safety was shattered when a young woman disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the community for nearly 30 years. Sarah Michelle Broussard was 23 years old when she vanished on a humid October evening. She had grown up in Lafayette Parish, attended the local high school, and was known throughout the community as a bright and caring young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher. Sarah worked part-time at a family-owned diner on the main highway, a place where locals gathered for coffee and conversation. Her smile was warm and genuine, and she had a way of making everyone who walked through the door feel like family. She lived with her younger sister in a small apartment near the center of town, and her parents lived just a few miles away on the property where Sarah had spent her childhood. On the evening of October 14, 1995, Sarah finished her shift at the diner around 9 in the evening. Her coworkers remembered her being in good spirits, laughing and joking as she cleaned tables and prepared to close up for the night. She had mentioned plans to stop by the local grocery store on her way home to pick up a few items for the weekend. The store was less than 2 miles from the diner, a straight shot down the main road that cut through the heart of Lafayette Parish. It should have been a simple errand, one she had made countless times before, but Sarah never made it home that night. Her younger sister became worried when Sarah had not returned by midnight. She tried calling the diner and the store, but no one had seen her since she left work. By 2 in the morning, the family had contacted the local sheriff's department to report her missing. Deputies immediately began searching the route between the diner and the grocery store, looking for any sign of Sarah or her car, a small blue sedan that she had saved up to buy just a year earlier. They found the vehicle around dawn, parked in the lot of the grocery store with the driver's side door slightly ajar. Sarah's purse was still inside, along with her wallet and keys. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, and no indication of what had happened to her. The investigation into Sarah's disappearance began immediately, with the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office treating it as a potential abduction. Detectives interviewed everyone who had seen Sarah that night, from her coworkers at the diner to shoppers who had been at the grocery store around the time she would have arrived. Several people remembered seeing her car in the parking lot, but no one recalled seeing Sarah herself. The store's security cameras were reviewed, but the footage was grainy and inconclusive. It showed a figure that could have been Sarah entering the store briefly, but the person's face was never clearly visible, and there was no footage of her leaving. As days turned into weeks, the search for Sarah intensified. Volunteers from across the parish and neighboring communities joined law enforcement in combing through fields, wooded areas, and waterways. Flyers with Sarah's photograph were posted on every telephone pole and storefront window. Her family made tearful pleas on local television stations, begging anyone with information to come forward. The community rallied around the Broussard family, organizing prayer vigils and fundraisers to support the ongoing search efforts. But despite all the attention and resources devoted to finding her, Sarah remained missing. Detectives pursued every lead that came in, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. They interviewed dozens of people, including Sarah's friends, family members, and acquaintances. They looked into her personal life, searching for any indication that she might have had enemies or been involved in anything dangerous. But by all accounts, Sarah was well-liked and had no known conflicts with anyone. Her life was simple and ordinary, filled with work, family, and plans for the future. There was nothing to suggest why anyone would want to harm her. One person who came under scrutiny early in the investigation was Michael Allen Hebert, a man in his early 30s who lived on a rural property just outside of town. Hebert had a history of minor run-ins with the law, mostly related to alcohol and disorderly conduct, and several people had mentioned seeing him at the grocery store on the night Sarah disappeared. Detectives interviewed Hebert multiple times in the weeks following Sarah's disappearance. He admitted to being at the store that evening, but insisted he had not seen or spoken to Sarah. He claimed he had purchased beer and cigarettes and then driven straight home. His alibi was weak, but there was no physical evidence linking him to Sarah's disappearance, and without a body or a crime scene, investigators had little to go on. The case eventually went cold. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement and the community, no new leads emerged. Sarah's family never stopped searching for answers, but as the years passed, the likelihood of finding her alive grew increasingly slim. Her disappearance became one of those tragic mysteries that small communities carry with them, a painful reminder of a life cut short and a family forever changed. The Broussard family held memorial services on the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance each year, keeping her memory alive and refusing to give up hope that one day they would learn the truth about what happened to her. For nearly 3 decades, the case remained unsolved. The original detectives retired, and new generations of law enforcement officers took over the investigation. The file on Sarah's disappearance sat in the cold case archive, periodically reviewed but never yielding new information. The technology available to investigators in 1995 was limited, and many of the techniques that are now standard practice in criminal investigations simply did not exist back then. But as forensic science advanced, particularly in the field of DNA analysis and genetic genealogy, cold cases across the country began to see new life breathed into them. In 2023, the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office received a grant to reopen several cold cases using modern forensic technology. Sarah's disappearance was among the cases selected for review. A team of detectives, along with forensic specialists, began the painstaking process of re-examining all the evidence that had been collected nearly 30 years earlier. They sent samples for DNA testing that had been preserved from Sarah's car, including swabs taken from the door handle and steering wheel. They also requested familial DNA testing, a technique that can identify relatives of a suspect even if the suspect's own DNA is not in any database. The results of the DNA testing came back several months later, and what they revealed sent shockwaves through the investigation. Forensic analysts had identified DNA on the driver's side door handle of Sarah's car that did not belong to her or any of her family members. When run through genealogical databases, the DNA was linked to a family tree that eventually pointed to Michael Allen Hebert, the same man who had been questioned in the original investigation. Further testing confirmed with near certainty that the DNA found on Sarah's car belonged to Hebert. Armed with this new evidence, detectives obtained a warrant to collect a fresh DNA sample from Hebert, who was still living in the same area where he had been in 1995. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Hebert initially denied any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. But as investigators pressed him with the irrefutable scientific proof that his DNA had been found on her car, his story began to change. Over the course of several interviews, Hebert slowly revealed what had happened that night in October 1995. According to Hebert's eventual confession, he had been at the grocery store that evening and had noticed Sarah in the parking lot. He claimed he had been drinking heavily and was not thinking clearly. He said he approached Sarah as she was loading groceries into her car and attempted to strike up a conversation. When she rebuffed his advances and tried to get into her car, he became angry and grabbed her. A struggle ensued, and in a moment of rage, Hebert said he struck Sarah, causing her to lose consciousness. Panicked and realizing what he had done, he put her in his own vehicle and drove her to a remote area of his property. Hebert led investigators to a wooded section of his land, where he said he had buried Sarah's body shortly after taking her from the grocery store parking lot. A search of the area was conducted, and after several days of excavation, human remains were recovered. Forensic analysis confirmed through dental records that the remains were those of Sarah Michelle Broussard. After nearly 30 years, her family finally had the answers they had been searching for, though the truth brought with it a profound and devastating grief. The arrest of Michael Allen Hebert sent shockwaves through Lafayette Parish. Many people remembered the original investigation and the suspicions that had surrounded Hebert at the time. The fact that he had been living in the same community for all these years, walking among the people who had mourned Sarah's disappearance, was almost too much for some to bear. There was anger and disbelief that he had evaded justice for so long, and questions about whether more could have been done in the original investigation to bring him to justice sooner. The community gathered once again, this time not to search for Sarah, but to mourn her properly and to support her family as they prepared to lay her to rest. The small church where Sarah had been baptized as a child was filled to capacity for her funeral service. Friends and family members shared memories of her kindness, her laughter, and the dreams she had for her future that were stolen from her that night in 1995. Her parents, now elderly and frail, spoke through tears about the relief of finally knowing what happened to their daughter, even as they grappled with the horror of how she had died. Michael Allen Hebert was formally charged with second-degree murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. Prosecutors announced their intention to seek the maximum sentence allowed under Louisiana law. The evidence against Hebert was overwhelming, not only the DNA evidence that had linked him to the crime, but also his own confession and the recovery of Sarah's remains from his property. Legal experts predicted that a trial would result in a swift conviction, and many wondered if Hebert would ultimately plead guilty to avoid a lengthy and public trial. The case reignited discussions about the importance of preserving evidence in unsolved cases and the potential for new technologies to solve crimes that had long been considered hopeless. The detectives who had worked on the case credited the advances in DNA analysis and genetic genealogy with making it possible to finally bring Sarah's killer to justice. They noted that the evidence collected by the original investigators in 1995 had been carefully preserved, which made it possible to conduct the modern forensic testing that cracked the case wide open. For Sarah's family, the resolution of the case brought a complex mixture of emotions. There was relief in finally knowing what had happened to her and where she had been all these years. There was satisfaction in seeing her killer arrested and facing justice. But there was also profound sadness and anger that Sarah's life had been taken from her at such a young age, and that her family had been forced to live with uncertainty and pain for nearly 3 decades. Her younger sister, who had been waiting for Sarah to come home that night in 1995, spoke to reporters about the long journey to this moment and the hope that Sarah could now rest in peace. The investigation also prompted officials to review other cold cases from the same era, with the hope that advances in forensic technology could bring closure to other families who had been waiting for answers. The success in solving Sarah's case demonstrated that even after many years, it was still possible to find justice for victims and hold perpetrators accountable for their crimes. Law enforcement agencies across Louisiana and the broader region took note, and efforts to apply modern DNA techniques to old cases gained momentum. As the legal proceedings against Michael Allen Hebert moved forward, the community of Lafayette Parish began the process of healing. The trauma of Sarah's disappearance had lingered for so long, casting a shadow over the town and leaving residents with a sense of unease that never fully went away. Now, with the truth finally revealed and her killer in custody, there was a sense that some measure of peace could be restored. But the case also served as a stark reminder that evil can exist anywhere, even in the quiet corners of small-town Louisiana, where people had always believed they were safe. Sarah's story became a symbol of the importance of never giving up on the search for truth and justice. Her family had refused to let her be forgotten, keeping her memory alive through the decades and supporting the ongoing investigation even when it seemed hopeless. Their perseverance, combined with the dedication of law enforcement and the power of modern science, had finally brought Sarah home and ensured that the person responsible for her death would be held accountable. The impact of the case extended beyond Lafayette Parish, capturing the attention of true crime enthusiasts and advocates for victims' rights across the country. The story of how DNA evidence and genetic genealogy had solved a nearly 30-year-old cold case was featured in news outlets and podcasts, highlighting both the tragedy of Sarah's death and the triumph of finally achieving justice. For many, it was a reminder that no case is ever truly closed, and that advances in technology can bring new hope to families who have been waiting for answers. As the months passed and the case moved through the legal system, the residents of Lafayette Parish continued to grapple with the revelation that Michael Allen Hebert had been responsible for Sarah's disappearance. Some people remembered him from the original investigation, while others had known him only as a quiet, somewhat troubled man who kept to himself. The fact that he had been able to hide his crime for so long, living a relatively normal life while Sarah's family suffered, was difficult for many to comprehend. The trial of Michael Allen Hebert was scheduled for the following year, though legal experts predicted that a plea deal might be reached before the case went to court. Prosecutors were prepared to present the DNA evidence, the confession, and the recovery of Sarah's remains as proof of Hebert's guilt. The defense faced an uphill battle, as the evidence against their client was both overwhelming and irrefutable. For Sarah's family, the prospect of a trial was daunting, but they were determined to see justice served and to ensure that Hebert received the maximum punishment for his crimes. The resolution of Sarah's case also brought attention to the broader issue of missing persons and unsolved homicides. Advocates used the case as an example of why it is so important to fund cold case investigations and to invest in the latest forensic technologies. They argued that every victim deserves to have their case pursued with the same vigor and resources, regardless of how much time has passed. The success in solving Sarah's case proved that it is never too late to seek justice, and that families should never lose hope that the truth will eventually come to light. In the end, the arrest and charging of Michael Allen Hebert in connection with the disappearance and murder of Sarah Michelle Broussard represented both an ending and a beginning. It was the end of a nearly 30-year search for answers and the beginning of the legal process that would hold him accountable for his actions. It was the end of uncertainty for Sarah's family and the beginning of their journey toward healing and closure. And it was the end of one chapter in the history of Lafayette Parish and the beginning of a new era in which the community could move forward with the knowledge that justice had been served for one of their own. The case stands as a testament to the resilience of those who loved Sarah and refused to let her be forgotten. It is a story of tragedy and loss, but also of hope and determination. It demonstrates the power of modern science to bring light to the darkest corners of unsolved crimes, and the unwavering commitment of law enforcement to pursue justice no matter how much time has passed. For the people of Lafayette Parish, the resolution of Sarah's case brought a sense of closure that had been elusive for far too long, and a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, the truth will ultimately prevail.